Never explain yourself. The moment you do, you hand the room your authority. Not some of it, all of it. When you justify your decisions, your choices, your existence, you are telling everyone watching that their verdict has power over you. You stepped inside their court. You accepted their rules. And every person in that room feels that shift before a single word lands. Here is the trap. The smarter you are, the faster you fall into it, because smart people can build reasons, and the more reasons you give, the more you bleed. The ancient Stoics had a precise mechanism, a psychological pivot, that let them silence accusers without a single word of defense. No charm, no aggression, just a trained response most people are never taught. By the end of this, you will know exactly why you keep leaking power, what it is costing you, and how to execute the same pivot that kept Cato the Younger untouchable in the most dangerous political arena in history. Let's be precise about what is actually happening when you over-explain. This is not a communication problem. It is not a social anxiety problem. It is a surrender signal, and your body broadcasts it before your brain finishes the sentence. Here is the mechanic. When you explain yourself, you are telling the other person they are the judge, and you are the one on trial. The courtroom is not in the room. It is inside your mind. The moment you open it, the trial is already running. You accepted the frame that their challenge deserves a hearing. And the moment that internal trial begins, you have already lost something you cannot take back. Think of your authority as an account you have been building. Through every decision, every silence, every action, every word of justification is a withdrawal. You are not leaking power. You are evaporating it. Leaks can be patched. Evaporation is silent and continuous. By the time you notice the level dropping, far more is gone than you think. The room feels the drop before you do. Now look at what happens in the minds of the people listening. They do not process long explanations as logic. They process them as anxiety, and anxiety reads as guilt. You can build the most airtight argument in the room, and if you deliver it with the energy of a man who needs to be believed, they will not absorb the argument. They will absorb the need. And need is weakness. There is also a layer of conditioning that runs deeper than you think. From the time you were a child, explanation was the currency of safety. Teachers demanded it. Parents required it. Every institution rewarded justification and punished silence. You learned, below conscious thought, that explaining yourself equals protection. That wiring is still running, and it is running against you now. Stop. Think of the last time you felt that heat in your chest before a justification. That tightening in your throat when someone questioned your decision. That was not logic. That was your nervous system surrendering. And if you felt it, the room saw it. That tightening is the symptom. But to kill the reflex, you have to understand the trigger. It is not the person challenging you. It is not the severity of the accusation. It is something built into your identity at the level of survival. We will dissect that in the next section, but here is what you do not see yet. Every time that reflex fires and you obey it, you are not just losing that moment. You are setting a rate of expectation. You are telling that person's nervous system, apply pressure here, and this man will produce justification. Now the interest starts accruing. The next time they challenge you, the bar is lower. They expect the explanation before you give it. The time after that, the challenge will be faster, because they have learned they do not need much to trigger the response. That is the social interest rate, and it compounds silently across every room you operate in. The trigger is proximity, not physical proximity, emotional proximity. The closer something is to your identity, your reputation, your competence, your integrity, the faster the justification reflex fires. And the faster it fires, the less control you have over it. Here is the full mechanics of the trap. High-level people have built something worth defending. You have a reputation, a track record, a self-concept tied to being competent, trustworthy. right? So when someone attacks that, every neuron fires in the same direction. Defend it. The smarter you are, the more reasons you can construct. The more reasons you can construct, the more you explain. And the more you explain, the more you bleed. Your own brain destroys your authority faster than any enemy could. That reflex is not irrational. In the environment it was built for, it was survival. But you are not in that environment anymore. You are in a social and professional hierarchy where the reflex itself is the weapon being used against you. It fires faster than conscious thought, before you have made a single decision. Here is the asymmetry you need to understand. Your accuser does not need to be correct. They do not need evidence. They do not even need the room to take them seriously. They only need to make you defend yourself. Because the moment you defend, the accusation is validated, not logically, but in how people feel it. The room did not see proof. The room saw you react, and reaction is its own kind of confession. This is an ancient mechanic. It was not invented in a boardroom or a psychology lab. It was refined on the floor of the Roman Senate, in Renaissance courts, in every high-stakes human environment where power was the only thing that mattered. The people who understood it used it like a blade. Find the man with something to prove, apply pressure, and watch him bleed credibility while defending himself. Now look at the conditioning layer again. The institutions that trained you did not just reward explanation. They punished its absence. Silence was treated as guilt. Refusing to explain was defiance or incompetence. So you learned to fill the silence. You learned that a clear, articulate explanation was the mark of an intelligent, responsible person. That lesson was useful in a classroom. It is lethal in the arena, because in the arena, the rules are flipped. Silence is not guilt. Silence is sovereignty. The man who does not feel the need to explain himself is sending a signal the explaining man never can, that he operates from an internal structure entirely his own, and your judgment is simply not a variable in his calculation. That is not confidence. That is a sovereign mind, one that has removed external verdicts from its system entirely. Now you might be thinking, but what about trust? Don't people trust you more when you explain your reasoning? No. They trust you more when you are consistent, when your behavior over time tells them something about your character that no single explanation ever could. Explanations produce debate. Consistent behavior produces belief. There is a difference between a man who explains why he is trustworthy and a man who simply is. One of those men is asking you to believe him. The other does not need to ask. The trap is set. The conditioning is deep, and the people who understand this mechanic are using it against you with precision. But there was one man, operating inside the most politically lethal environment in recorded Western history, whose enemies spent decades trying to find his lever. They never found it, not because he was untouchable by nature, because he understood something about power that his enemies, for all their skill, never fully grasped. To see what he did, you first have to understand what he refused to do, even when his career, his legacy, and his life were at stake. Understand something before we go further. This is not about a single conversation. It is not about one moment where you explained yourself and felt the air leave the room. Those moments are symptoms. What you are actually losing runs on a longer timeline, and it is far more expensive than you have been calculating. Authority is not given. It is not assigned by title or tenure or track record. It is perceived, and perception is not built through logic. It is built through patterns. Every interaction you have with another person is a data point. They are not consciously recording it, but their nervous system is. Over weeks, months, years, it builds a model of who you are, what you respond to, what threatens you, what you need from them. Every time you over-explain, you write a line into that model, and what that line says is, This person can be pressured into justifying himself. That is the compound effect. You are training the people around you to expect something from you. And once that expectation is installed, you are paying interest on it indefinitely. They apply pressure because pressure produces explanation. You made yourself predictable. And predictability in a social hierarchy is a cage. Now think about the permanent court. Every social and professional environment is a silent tribunal. It runs continuously. It assigns status based on behavioral signals most people never consciously register. You are always being judged in this court, whether you participate or not. The verdicts are not announced. They are installed, quietly, permanently, into how every person in the room models your limits and your capabilities. Here is what makes it dangerous. Once a verdict is recorded, it takes years of consistent counter-behavior to overwrite it. One session of over-explaining does not just cost you that conversation. It files a sentence into a court that never formally adjourns, and every future interaction that person has with you runs that sentence in the background. The man who never explains himself submits a very different kind of evidence. He submits depth. He submits the suggestion of an interior structure so solid that external pressure simply does not reach it. People assign capability to those they cannot fully read. They assign danger. They assume there is more happening beneath the surface than they are being shown. And that assumption is leverage. Mystery is not an accident. It is a posture. And it is one you can build deliberately, starting with what you choose not to say. Marcus Aurelius understood this at a fundamental level. His private writings, what became the Meditations, were never intended for anyone else to read. He wrote them as internal discipline, not external communication. He was not managing his reputation with those words. He was managing his own court, the one inside his mind, so that the external court never had access to his real reasoning. The moment your internal logic becomes visible, it becomes a target. So he kept it private. He kept it sovereign. That principle applies to you. Every explanation you give is a window into your internal court, and every person you give that window to becomes a potential prosecutor. Now look at what the unexplained man actually produces in the people around him. Consider a general who gives direction without explaining his reasoning. He does not brief his subordinates on the logic behind the order. He gives the direction and expects execution. What do those men assume? They assume competence beyond their own understanding. They assume the decision is part of a larger architecture they cannot yet see. That assumption drives execution at a level that explained decisions rarely produce, because explained decisions invite debate, and debate invites doubt, and doubt corrodes action. The unexplained man does not just protect his authority, he amplifies it. And here is the truth underneath all of this. The erosion of your position through over-explanation is nearly invisible while it happens. You feel relief in the moment, like you closed a loop. But the loop is not closed. The verdict is already written, and you are the one who handed the court its evidence. There is an architecture that stops this, a precise, repeatable mechanism, refined in the most dangerous political arena in history by a man his enemies could never break. Picture the Roman Senate, not the textbook version, the real one. A hall so thick with political tension that men walked in armed with words sharpened to kill. Factions in every corner, whisper networks running faster than any spoken decree. And at the center of it, not hiding, not maneuvering, stands Cato, surrounded by enemies who spent years building a case designed to end him. They are shouting accusations of corruption, of disloyalty, of conduct unbecoming a Roman statesman. The entire chamber is watching, calculating, waiting for the moment he breaks. He does not break, not because he lacks the intelligence to respond, because he understands something every man in that room does not, that the response itself is the trap. Rome's late republic was a predator's ecosystem. Every senator had enemies, And those enemies were not waiting for legitimate grounds to destroy you. They were manufacturing them. Character assassination was standard operating procedure. Accusations of corruption, misconduct, disloyalty, these were weapons drawn the way a soldier draws a blade, casually, strategically, with the full expectation that the target would bleed in public while trying to defend himself. Cato was accused repeatedly. His enemies were not amateurs. These were men who had spent entire careers learning exactly how much pressure to apply and exactly where. They had watched dozens of men unravel under public accusation, watched them exhaust their credibility building elaborate defenses, watched the Senate absorb not the defense but the desperation underneath it. They applied that same pressure to Cato. And Cato did something his enemies had no counter for. He refused to enter the predator's ecosystem on their terms. He refused to hand them the lever. Not with a dramatic gesture, not with a counter-accusation. He simply continued operating, making decisions, holding his positions, conducting himself with the same behavioral consistency he had shown before the accusations existed. He did not deny the charges. He did not construct arguments against them. He did not perform indignation or summon witnesses to his character. He treated the accusations the way a man of genuine authority treats a challenge he considers beneath his threshold. He did not grant them a courtroom. Look at the mechanics of what that communicated. When Cato refused to defend himself, he was not signaling indifference. He was signaling something far more powerful, that the accusation did not have the authority to pull him out of his own frame. When the room watched that signal, the calculus shifted. Because the logic of a public accusation depends entirely on the reaction it produces. The accusation says, "This man has something to answer for." The defense confirms it. But when there is no defense, when the accused simply keeps moving, the accusation is left holding its own weight. And most accusations collapse under that weight, because they were never built to stand alone. They were built to trigger a reaction. Remove the reaction, and you remove the structure that keeps them standing. Epictetus made the foundation explicit. You do not control what is said about you. You do not control the accusation, the timing, the audience, or the intent behind it. What you control is whether you grant the accusation a courtroom inside your own mind. The moment you open that courtroom, you have handed the accuser something they did not earn, your internal sovereignty. The Stoic position is not that the accusation is harmless. It is that its power is entirely contingent on your participation. Cato's history was his defense, not the speech he never gave. That is the pivot in its purest form, not a technique you deploy, an identity you operate from. The man who built something real does not need to argue for it. The record speaks, the behavior speaks, the silence speaks loudest of all. Because silence from a man of genuine substance does not read as absence. It reads as depth. It reads as a man who has already decided that your verdict is not a variable in his calculation. His enemies spent decades looking for the lever. They never found it, because Cato had understood something they had not. The lever only exists if you hand it over, refuse to participate, and you take the weapon out of their hands. Now look at how that performs under real pressure, in the specific situations where most people break completely. Theory without application is just philosophy. So look at the live battlefield, the specific situations where most people break, and exactly how the pivot performs in each one. The first situation is the public challenge. Someone calls you out in front of others, a colleague, a rival, someone who calculated that a public setting amplifies the pressure and shrinks your options. They are right that it amplifies the pressure. They are wrong that it shrinks your options. What they are actually doing is giving you a stage. Most people respond by scrambling, launching into an explanation that gets longer and more elaborate as the discomfort in the room builds. Watch how fast that unravels. The explanation signals the challenge landed. The audience absorbs that signal and starts assigning weight to an accusation they might have dismissed entirely if you had stayed quiet. The pivot here is one declarative statement, delivered without heat, and then silence. Not aggressive silence, not theatrical silence, the silence of a man who has said what needed to be said and has no investment in what happens next. 4 words. I've noted your perspective. Not a rebuttal, not a dismissal, a clinical acknowledgement that says 2 things at once. You heard it, and it has not moved you. Then you stop. Let the room fill that silence. They will. And what they fill it with will almost always work in your favor, because unexplained confidence is magnetic. People build narratives around it that are more powerful than anything you could have constructed yourself. The second situation is the authority test. A superior questions your decision in a meeting, directly in front of others. The instinct is to overjustify, walk them through your reasoning in exhaustive detail, prove you thought it through, prove you belong in the room. That instinct is exactly wrong. What overjustification communicates to a superior is not competence. It is a need for approval. And a man who needs approval from above is a man who can be controlled by withholding it. The Stoic move is to state the outcome you are driving toward. 1 sentence, then stop. Force them to engage your direction rather than audit your logic. 6 words. This is the direction we're moving. Not, I think we should. Not, my reasoning was. A direction, stated once. You are not asking for permission. You are reporting a trajectory. That distinction is felt immediately, because one of those sentences belongs to a man who needs approval, and the other belongs to a man who does not. The third situation is negotiation under pressure. The other side challenges your position, questions your numbers, your terms, your logic. This is a calculated move, designed to get you explaining and justifying until you rationalize your way into a concession. The more you defend your original position, the more you signal it is negotiable, because positions that require defense are negotiable by definition. Sovereign positions are not. Silence here is a complete sentence. State your terms once without elaboration and hold. Let the discomfort sit on their side of the table. It almost always does more work than any argument you could build. The fourth situation is the hardest, the loyalty trap. Someone close to you, a partner, a friend, someone whose opinion carries real weight, demands an explanation for your choices. This is where the pivot breaks most people, because emotional proximity is precisely what triggers the justification reflex at full speed. When someone you care about is applying the pressure, explaining, feels like proof that the relationship matters. It is not. It is the reflex wearing a disguise. The pivot here is specific. Name the value of the relationship without explaining the decision. This matters to me. The decision stands. That is not coldness. That is sovereignty. And people who are in real relationships with sovereign individuals trust them more, not less, because what they are trusting is not the explanation. It is the consistency of the person delivering it. Now look at the common thread running through all four situations. The mechanic is identical across every one of them, because human hierarchy has not changed. What signals power has not changed. The man who refuses to enter the frame wins. Not sometimes, every time. That is the pivot. But knowing it is not the same as owning it. Knowing the architecture is not the same as owning it. The justification reflex is fast. It fires before you have made a conscious decision. The pivot requires something the reflex does not have: a trained pause, a gap between the challenge and your response. That gap does not exist naturally. You build it deliberately, or you do not have it at all. Marcus Aurelius called this the discipline of assent. The principle is exact. Something lands, a challenge, an accusation, a demand for explanation, and instead of letting the reflex carry you into speech, you hold. You examine what is actually being asked of you, and you decide, from a position of stillness, whether that demand deserves a response at all. That interrogation takes practice. Here is how you build it. The first drill is the 5-second hold. When challenged, pause before any response, not dramatically, not as a performance, just physically hold before your mouth opens. 5 seconds of silence feels long when your nervous system is screaming to defend. Do it anyway. That discomfort is the reflex losing its grip on you. The second drill is the 1-sentence rule. If a response is genuinely needed, give 1 sentence, not a paragraph, not a structured argument. 1 sentence that states your position or your direction, and then you stop. The moment you add a second sentence, you are already explaining. 1 sentence is a declaration. Everything after it is a defense. The third drill is the pattern audit. Go back through your last 5 conversations where you over-explained. Identify the exact moment you broke, the word, the sentence, where the reflex took over. You are not doing this to feel bad about it. You are doing it to locate the precise trigger so you can build the pause at that specific point. The audit is surgical. Use it that way. Understand what you are actually building here. This is not a communication technique. This is an identity shift. You are becoming the type of person who operates from internal authority, whose decisions do not require an audience, whose silence communicates more than most people's arguments. That person is not built in a single conversation. They are built through every held pause, every single sentence, every time you refuse to let someone else's frame become your operating reality. Over time, the people around you stop expecting explanations. That absence of expectation is not a small thing. It is the definition of authority. The man who never explains himself is not cold. He is not arrogant. He is simply operating from a level of internal certainty that most people have never built. Cato did not survive Rome's most dangerous arena by defending himself. He survived by refusing to participate in the trial at all. That is the standard. 1 sentence, 5 seconds. Hold the silence. Start there, and watch how fast the room recalibrates around you. If you want to go deeper on Stoic power principles, keep watching. Subscribe if you are serious about it.